Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. My name is David Parker. I'm here with Zach Gerber and my longtime friend, compatriot, brother-in-arms, and sometimes thorn in my side, Cameron Davies. Cam, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, David. Thanks for having me on. It's certainly been a while, and happy to have a discussion on your show finally.
Finally, I mean, I guess we're over 100 episodes in. I would have thought you would have come on earlier, but due to events beyond our control, this is our first episode with you.
I wanted to make sure you had lots of practice under your belt before I came.
Exactly. So, listeners who don't know, Cam and I have been friends coming up almost a decade now, I guess. Getting close there. 2014, was that when we met?
Probably 2013.
2013, that's right. 2013 we met. And Cam, actually, the first time we worked together was after the Wild Rose had almost fallen apart, and he was director of Polyops under Brian Jean, and I was running Central Alberta for the War Room, and ended up having to go there because we were very low on manpower that particular campaign, if you remember correctly, Cam. But Cam's, I've always admired his, though somewhat younger than me, incredible organizer, probably one of the greatest organizers in Canada, or not in Canada right now, but who has participated in the Canadian political process. I've learned a lot from him. Hopefully taught him a few things along the way. Good friend of mine. He's had a rough shake with a certain leader that we're all going to have a long conversation about today, but actually a man of character despite what all his enemies say about him.
Well, that's kind of you, David. And I think, you mentioned being short people, and I think that's a never-ending story in politics. I don't recall a single campaign or entity that I've worked in a volunteer capacity that ever had an abundance of people, but you certainly have been one that's left a mark with me, and certainly have learned numerous things from you. And our time in Alberta politics and Canadian politics has certainly been a time of ups and downs as any, and full of learning experiences and plenty of opportunities to develop both humility and advance our individual capabilities. So,
yeah, I think this is what I want to talk to you about, because you're probably one of the few people in the world even that I can talk to about this, but what would you define being an organizer as, right? Because I try to tell people what it is that we do, because you do other things and I do other things. I raise capital for companies, help startups, and you're in your job right now working for the agency that you do, and have military experience, all that kind of things. But fundamentally, what we love, our profession, let's call it, is being an organizer. So I'd like to hear your definition of that. Some people call us assassins, but that's not really what we do. We're organizers. What I call it, people herding to a degree. It's helping show people how to make the difference they want to. But I'd like to hear your definition of it.
Sure. So obviously the root of organizing is first step. One must be organized, and there are a lot of people in various industries who don't possess that. And from a project management perspective, certainly campaigns entail numerous similarities of project management in general. And I think a lot of my experience in my formative years working in the oil and gas industry, where project management was a huge part of the job that I had then, working my way up to become a driller and rig managing and things like that. So the organizational aspect is a huge part of it. Certainly politics is a blood sport, and both you and I have taken on projects in politics that the general public or membership of political parties may have seen as being overtly aggressive. And and at times perhaps perhaps outside the realm of what would otherwise be deemed as civil. However, while politics is a blood sport, organizing itself is actually a labor of love and building, because you
Yes.
build,
Yes.
not tearing something down. Now, others may perceive that you building something is tearing their sandcastle down.
Yeah.
And especially in politics, people perceive that because politics becomes personal. And so if you're building a sandcastle that makes my sandcastle seem inferior, you are a threat to my sandcastle. And so you become a political enemy, as it were. And so, but at the root of it, organizing is building. You're an architect. You have to be organized. You have to articulate your plan, because if you can't do that, no one will fall in behind you. And I think we see.
Okay, go into that a little bit deeper, because I think that is the core of it right there. You have to have a plan. So what does that look like as an organizer? How do you make a plan? Well, why would you make a plan? What are you selling, right?
Sure, and I think a good example of that, and you mentioned that earlier, that the current premier of Alberta, early on in his provincial foray, articulated a very simple and appealing plan to the majority of Albertans that people were able to buy in on, both volunteers, donors, the rank and file membership of various political parties at the time. And because of the appeal of that plan, the articulation of that plan, the simplicity of that plan, an architectural form was able to take place, and the shape of building something together.
Yes.
Feeling.
Pulling in the same direction, right?
And so it's more than telling, it's selling. And I think a large part of that is articulation of a plan. So one must have a plan and execute a plan. I'll give you an acronym that is used in some organizations, and it's called BAMSIS. You begin planning, you arrange reconnaissance, you make a plan, you conduct your plan, you implement your plan, and then you supervise. And that's a huge part of organization as well. And developing your plan requires those steps to ensure it's properly executed. Where organization falls off the tracks is when you are reactive, because an architect is not reactive. An architect and executes the plan, and that requires a lot of planning. Admiral Nimitz once said that plans are useless, but planning is priceless. And there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because how often is it that you plan for something and then it just doesn't occur? I think that happens all the time. I don't think people realize how often you can create an entire plan, because people are so addicted to their plan working, that when it doesn't, they get emotionally invested in it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And politics is a entirely different nature of fluidity that you have to stay malleable, and you have to adapt to wrenches that may get thrown in your way, because while you may have a plan, others also have plans, and you may be a disruption to them, and they may be a disruption to you, and that's just the nature of it.
I've always described politics as the mob combined with multi-level marketing. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your favorite analogy is? And I'll share why that's mine, because there's territory, right? In politics, you have to respect people's territory, because, as you said, usually the people you're dealing with are leaders, right? You're usually to build a political organization, you need pieces of that organization. And that organization has to have leaders in it, because you need people. And you can't lead all of them at once. No individual has a capacity to invest the kind of time into every member of an organization beyond, let's say, 20 people. Nobody has the time to invest in more than that adequately to build loyalty and community. And that's why it has to go down the chain. And usually how that works is geographic territory. That's why we divide our politics into geographies, ridings, right? Constituency associations, electoral district associations. We do that because proximity usually breeds community. And then there's community leaders that evolve out of proximity communities. And those leaders are the people in politics you tend to go to ask for their support, right, Cam?
I would agree with the geography and to an extent the multi-level marketing aspect of it. You know, I recall a political science class that I was in many years ago, almost a decade now, and we were learning about the regional boss system of federal Canadian politics that existed in the 1940s, 1950s. And part of that system actually still very much exists in the provincial scale. Now, not to the extent that it did federally, where all a federal leader needed to do was get the endorsement from I need the boss man for Saskatchewan to endorse me and I will win all of Saskatchewan. It doesn't quite work the same way anymore, but certainly from a regional perspective, I can recall individuals who I would phone and ask for support, knowing that it would move an entire region or at least influence a region.
Yeah, it's never one, at least in my experience, there's never one boss. You need as many of the bosses. It's a game of scales, right? It's who can tip, because you're all just trying to tip past the 51, right? It's all a game of math trying to get past 51. And so let's say there's a guy who represents a community of 2,000. Maybe all 2,000 don't go with him. But if he can sway that community to get it to 55, 45 in that community, and you get another leader and you can get it to 42, 40, or, and you just keep moving the scale. And it's just a game of, it's a Red Rover almost.
It is. And I recall a particular leadership campaign, actually for a guest that you had on a few weeks ago. And in that particular campaign, as the campaign chair and campaign manager, the regional boss system would have been 10 times better had it existed. But instead, the organizing component came into play. And as part of that, I had an Excel spreadsheet with about 1,400 individuals across Alberta with membership influences attributed to those individuals. So individuals who they had signed up, that ranged from anywhere from 25 to several hundred or several thousand memberships that those individuals directly were affiliated with, or who knew or had a network that was that large. And it required that many people, 1,400 people organizing to ensure a first ballot victory in that leadership contest. And that type of political system, I think, was lost on the existing Alberta premier today in that leadership.
Well, he seems to think that we're still living in like some medieval Catholicism in which once you hold a position, it's yours forever.
Well, and we know politics doesn't work that way.
No, but I want to go into the psychology of this, because here's a man that you and I have studied a lot. And I think there's people listening to this who would like to hear our reflections after so much observation. So I'm going to ask you 5 different questions. But the first is, why do you think that Jason Kenney was such a good field marshal, i.e. good at organizing a small corps towards a single objective, and is such a poor commander-in-chief or premier?
Sure. Well, one should never mistake opportunity with personal ability.
Yes.
What I mean by that is that it's very dangerous to assume that your success is directly attributed to your own ability and not to the opportunity that came open before you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go into this further, and I'll make a point on this. Take Back Alberta, I feel like, is a good example of that for me. There were times where I would confuse the success of the organization with my own ability. Not to say that I am without ability, but it was so insanely successful that it could go to your head. And it's important to always remember, always, that the product I was selling was massively popular, and that's why it was so successful. It had really nothing to do with the person selling it, apart from like some skills that I've developed. But the success was the product, and the product was getting rid of a tyrannical premier. Anyway, go on.
Absolutely. And there's a huge danger when blessings have been placed in front of an individual to the extent where they haven't known anything else, and they begin to attribute everything to their own ability. It reminds me of the scripture that pride cometh
before a fall, and a haughty spirit before destruction. Yes.
And certainly, David, I think in our own lives and political experiences, we have been blessed with many opportunities to
yes,
and to constantly remind ourselves that it's not our own ability why. And I think that's very critical to understand and impart upon your audience that in so much as I've been blessed in my own life, it's certainly not because of my own ability. Now, on the flip side of that, the various missteps that I've made have certainly been all me, and I take full ownership of that. I can't give that to anybody else. So
it is funny though. Okay, I want to go into that a little bit, Cam, because I completely agree. I think that the path to a successful and happy life is not taking credit for your accomplishments and taking credit for all of your failures, because when you take credit for them, you can learn from them, right? Whereas if you don't do that, how are you going to learn from something you don't even believe was your fault? You're going to write that off, right?
And you'll repeat it. And that's a big thing. Repeat it. Yeah.
And so I want to go into, like, you and I, we've suffered the slings and arrows of the mob multiple times. People have, our reputations, let's call them, have suffered under the scrutiny of the masses. I feel personally like that has only served to give me a better perspective on myself and realize that I am very flawed in a number of areas that need continuous work, and that really I've come to the conclusion that life is not about being right. It's about being a little bit less wrong every day. And if you commit to being a little bit less wrong, you'll make some progress. But if you're committed to being right, you're just going to be a miserable person to be around. And I have been that miserable person. But what would you say it was like? Because this isn't about me. This is an interview of you. What was it like to have your friends turn on you, have the public eye, the eye of Sauron, I've heard it called by certain people, shine upon you?
Well, going back to making the same mistakes twice, and I think I would just point out to your audience that sometimes it's been said, well, these individuals have a certain trait of not necessarily being loyal to those who they support, and the last leadership scenario in Alberta that you and I were involved with, and now you're involved with attempting to undo that.
Yes. my mother told me to clean up after myself when I make a mess, and that's what I'm trying to do.
I think that's a necessary part of politics. Now, what I have experienced and what I have learned is that there is no vindication in necessarily being on the right side of history too early in politics. And John the Baptist's illustrious career preceding the Messiah was not glamorous at all. Was he right? What was he right? Sure. Did he get any vindication for being right? No. And so I'm reminded of that when I see those who were the first to throw stones several years ago, now being hurled at today. And luckily, in some ways, I suppose, that wasn't my first time to experience that. If you recall, the previous leader of Wild Rose and I had a similar situation where I felt it an untenable situation that needed to be rectified.
I do, yeah. We both worked very hard on that.
So it had nothing to do with personal vendetta, but when you have the responsibility of playing a very large role, or at least having put in significant effort to achieve a result that is less than desirable, and knowing that it impacts more than just you or your friends, and knowing that the consequences for your efforts have resulted in a less than desirable outcome for people who may not even realize it. There's a duty and a responsibility that perhaps only you at that time can understand. And then it becomes a part of who are you and what is your moral character and fortitude, and do you have the courage of conviction to take an unpopular position when all those around you are saying, well, you're just being disloyal or you don't understand.
Yeah.
So being privy to information and being able to see the writing on the wall in some ways is both a blessing and a curse.
Well, okay, I want to go into that more because, like, it is a bit of a fine line to walk, right? Because sometimes you can even question your own sanity, right? Everyone around you is telling you, well, no, why would you ever go out? I remember when I went after Andrew Scheer because I thought there's no way this guy should stay on after losing to Justin Trudeau like that. And it really had nothing more to do than that. It was that I thought it was ridiculous that someone would even try to stay on after losing like that. And I was called all kinds of names and stuff. And that was kind of my first foray into that in the public, whereas you'd done, like you said, been publicly against Brian Jean, and then later on had your very public falling out with Jason Kenney, right? I know there were moments because we went on walks and talked about it where you were like, "Am I wrong? Like why is everyone against me?" And now you've been so vindicated in all of this, and obviously, I joined your perspective over a year ago now. How did you stay firm on that through all of that without questioning your own sanity?
I had to question my motives.
A good answer.
And I knew that if it was just about how I felt in that moment, and if I was acting based on just how I felt, then my actions at that time were probably not correct. But if my actions were devoid of a desire for vengeance, and if my actions were keeping in mind a longer term view of what was right and what was wrong, then I knew that my view and my position was right. Now, how that translates into action is something that over the last decade in my life has, I wouldn't use the word tempered, but perhaps more calculating.
Well, we've just learned that rash decisions are lead to less desirable outcomes than calculated decisions.
That is correct. And
Yeah.
and vengeance is a dish best served cold. Well, I don't feel the necessity to serve any vengeance. And so any action I take, and this was a realization that occurred to me several years ago, that any action I take must be done with purpose and intent of what is the desired outcome. Because will I feel better at the end of the day if John Smith Premier is there or is not there? How does that directly impact my life?
Right.
Doesn't make me feel better. And if my intention is to just feel better, I can think of a dozen different ways to do that.
Right. Yes.
I live in a very beautiful part of the world, and I've decided there's no room in my heart for hatred.
Hmm. I appreciate that. That's something I'm working on. I think I'm making progress on that, but perhaps haven't reached your level of enlightenment yet. I still feel a drive for justice, perhaps is the word that I would look for.
And I empathize with that. I certainly do. I would be lying if said that I had not experienced similar feelings. When you lose so much, certainly, my experiences in 2015 were challenging, but not nearly as challenging as they were in 2019, 2018, 2019. I think undoubtedly one of the dark periods in my life.
And I want to talk just on a more existential level about what it's like walking through kind of betrayal, abandonment. Of course, there are those who never betrayed you, but there aren't many of them. I've been through somewhat similar, although blessed with a number of people who stuck by me through thick and thin. What does that teach you about yourself? What did you learn? What are some, like, let's call it nuggets of wisdom you can give the audience on how to survive the dark night of the soul? Because I'm a big believer you have to go through the dark night of the soul. If you don't, then you're not gonna reach enlightenment. You're just going to continue to live in a very sensual driven, basically emotive existence. But I think to move to that other side, to get to that place that you're talking about where you're not doing things for vengeance, you have to go through that dark night of the soul. You don't have to describe the details, but perhaps maybe some of the lessons that were learned.
Certainly, and I would preface by saying I don't believe that the experiences should be or will be similar for everyone. Some of us are more hard-headed than others, and we have to learn.
I love you, bud.
To that, I would add that some of the lessons that I have learned is that the value of friendship. Those who, I remember in my very early formative years, my mother teaching me how to spell the word friend. And she said, Cam, it's someone who will fry with you till the end. And
there you go. There you go.
It's little things like that stuck with me. But certainly in politics especially, it can be very difficult to understand who are your actual friends and who aren't. And political friendship is fluid at best, transactional at worst. And so understanding that even a few people who you can count on as friends, and you are a blessed person, because there are a lot of people in this life who can't even count on that.
Yeah.
And I will say that even having several friends that I could count on through those challenging times, I will be eternally grateful for. In addition to that, another lesson I would say is taking time for introspection and not being reactionary. And you've known me for many years, and I don't think I've ever been described as a reactionary person. That being said, I did learn to take even more time and more effort to be more introspective and be more purposeful in my action.
What do you think taught you that, or what were some of the methods you used to teach yourself that, or was it organic? Like, walk me through, how do you get better at that? I think that's something it doesn't matter who you are, getting better at that's awesome.
everyone has to deal with being reactionary or rushing into judgment differently. For some, it's as simple as taking a deep breath, counting to 10, depending on the level of control your emotions have over you. For me, it was amplifying how much time I spent to walk through what my purpose was and what my intent was in my actions.
I
Often,
found, go ahead. I want to dig into that point, so I'm going to pause you there. But I found that once you have a clear alignment of yourself with reality, like once you're being honest with yourself and saying, this is how good I actually am at something, not how good I want people to think I am or want to feel I am. This is the reality of the situation. And I'd like to go into your time in boot camp, like what that was like. But I imagine that grounds you to reality in a big way. But I find the more you become aligned with reality, the less concerned you are with external events because you become internally focused, right? Not in the that you're looking internally, but there is structure inside. And as a young man, I didn't have that. I would say I was very reactionary. As you know, I think people would describe me as quite emotional, but I think when you can change that in yourself, it doesn't have to be that way. How'd you do that? How'd you get better at it?
so for me, I think learning that there's a lot of small stuff that just doesn't matter,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
appreciation, at least internally. It's not for appreciation isn't necessarily for something or for someone else to tell you, well, you should be happy because. It's for you to look at what you have and saying, wow, today I was able to have a nice warm cup of coffee. I'm actually drinking a cold brew tonight.
There we go.
So that I'm equally as over caffeinated as you are. Um, but it's the small things that you can find appreciation for, and that appreciation can lead you to a place of being content.
Yeah.
And if you're content, then there's less need and there's less desire to reactively search for the next thing or to feel like you have to do the next thing in order to feel content. So
And
appreciate
yet, and
small.
yet, wouldn't you say you're more productive now than you've ever been?
Oh, a thousand times, a thousand.
So explain that, because I think a lot of people feel that contentment is not doing anything. You and I would say, I know that I see this in you. You're more content than you've ever been the whole time I've known you, and yet you're producing more than you ever have.
Oh,
So how do we? I want to lay that out for listeners because I don't want them to get confused into thinking that our contentment manifests as laziness or even complacency.
I think certainly I've in my previous life I suffered from being a workaholic and learning how to mitigate the why I felt the necessity to pour myself into work resulted in measurable successes because of the time and effort applied. But it didn't lead me to a feeling of being happy or content. Aspects of it did, but as a rule, would I walk outside the door, take a deep breath, look at the sun, and feel the same way as I do now? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's the small things, and when you learn to appreciate the small things, your perspective on everything else changes,
It's true.
and you look at challenges and obstacles as just things that can be overcome and dealt with. As not the end of the world. It's
Yeah.
not the world, and these things that pop up, are they worth you losing your temper or feeling angry or even
Or
sad
insecure,
or
or
insecure.
feeling insecure.
And not that those feelings are bad or negative inherently, but certainly refraining from dwelling in them for lengthy periods of time is something that I do purposefully. I assess, okay, why was my expectation A, and am I able to rectify that deficiency? And what should my response be? Is my response based on what somebody else did, or is it based on my expectation of what I thought they should do?
Ah, I want to dig into that more, but we only have half an hour left, and there's so much to discuss. But the most important thing for us to discuss is what the hell is going on with Jason Kenney? Like, this is a man that arguably I think most conservatives admired, right?
Mm.
Most thought was an exceptional politician, a statesman even. I'm not going to lie. I know I said those words to you multiple times and you agreed with me on them before everything went the way that it did. So how were we deceived? What happened? Succinctly as you can. And then let's dive into the psychology of this.
So I'll go back to the opportunity that was there, and individuals who have been in politics for any length of time understand that the opportunities when they arise have to be seized. I don't think there was a whole lot of of um, deep weighing over whether or not um, coming back to Alberta and creating a new political entity out of two previous political entities was something that was not an opportunity.
No, it was an absolute opportunity.
It presented itself as being something that was there, and it was carefully weighed, albeit quickly weighed, but carefully weighed, and found that it was a very low risk venture. It would take work, effort, but ultimately there was an appetite and there was a venture. So we've all heard the Ralph Klein saying, find a parade large enough and jump in front of it. And I think it's just as simple as that. The psychology is that there was a parade, there was a growing groundswell of individuals, and certainly the NDP government at the time helped formulate that in many senses with its
Yeah,
policies.
absolutely. Well, they angered a lot of Albertans.
Conservatives across the spectrum, in an ideological sense, found more things that they agreed upon than things that they didn't. And it just took someone with a loud enough bullhorn to say, hey, we should do this and go in the.
So he has this bullhorn. He achieves this unification of the parties. He wins the leadership race. I mean, some people believe he would have lost. It was, I think you and I both agree, he would have won, just not by as much, even without whatever this nefarious stuff that's been happening was. Why does he fail as premier? He beats the NDP, right? He wins the leadership race. He beats the NDP. He's telling everyone, I've fulfilled almost every promise I made, which, I mean, there's spin there, but he's done a lot of things.
Sure.
Why is he failing so horribly that right now, according to an internal Janet Brown poll that I was told about, 10% behind the NDP, the UCP is, and the NDP would get 50 seats right now.
Mm-hmm. I'll give it to you in one word. It's called connectivity.
Okay, go forward.
So we've heard the phrase all politics is local. At a macro level, I believe there was an understanding of the opportunity, the desire for a change, and the things that could be done, or at least to the extent where he could execute a plan to achieve the macro objective. But at the micro level, importing individuals from out of province with no understanding of Alberta and applying a federal cabinet perspective to a provincial government, not understanding the history of division on the Conservative side in Alberta.
Not understanding it at all. That's probably been the wildest part of all of this. He thought that once he became leader, I think he thought because he watched Harper do it, that it was easy. That once you brought them together, they'd stay together. But Harper was a master of his craft. He was constantly building those bridges, right? And Kenny not only did he not build the bridges, how many did he burn? We could go through the list. You, Derek, me, a number of people that he used and discarded. Why do you think he did that? What's the psychology behind that? Like the number of people who tell me George Bears was on. He's the episode before yours, I believe. He was just on, and he literally said, one of the greatest shames of my life is voting for that man. And like that's a level of betrayal and distrust from George Bears is a very good man. Like whatever people may think of us, there's a lot of good people who feel betrayed by this man. Why do you think that's his MO?
Well, I think we see more answers in the response to it than in his actual action. And as a fellow student of history, I'm recalling Alexander the Great. And of course, he's probably one of the most well-known narcissists that is studied psychologically and from a historical perspective as well. And the difficulties he had with his generals. And he would react to their pushback. And that's where the response is more telling than the action, and how for a time there would be feigned efforts to placate until he could get his way again, effectively, and then revert right back to the same old thing.
Right.
And ultimately, over time, generals had enough of it. You can only get burned so many times.
And there was more Alexander the Great.
And politically, I think some people, unfortunately, are exposed to less of those circumstances. The circles are quite small until they trickle out. And that's why you have individuals like yourself, like others you've mentioned early on, several years ago, saying, gee, this isn't the guy I voted for.
No.
This isn't what I was told would be the case, or these aren't the things that, he's not holding up his end of the bargain, or whatever the case may be. So there's an aspect there, I think, that's important. Another aspect is when you have an individual who has become so accustomed to success built by others.
Yes.
And they only see it as success built by themselves. It is very easy to shed others. And that's unfortunately a complex that is very hard to change as an individual. I think if you feel all of your success is because me, myself, and I,
yeah,
a whole lot of room to keep those around you pulling in the same direction from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, that is a great analysis of. I can't really add to that. That's gold. A couple of things I do want to discuss though before we're done here is you've been working on a project. I'm not sure if you want to talk about it yet, but I think one of the things we should talk about is the Westminster system within the Alberta context and whether or not it works anymore. The party-based system, the way that it currently exists, to me, gives far too much power to the elites. And I look at what happened with Jody Gateman and Tim Hoven. For those who don't know, these are two candidates in Alberta that were disqualified by the party and then smeared by the premier. One of them being someone he asked to run to be on the board of directors of his own party at the founding convention and who won in a landslide, and the other who is an upstanding and well-known member of his church and community in central Alberta, calling them white supremacists, saying they have unacceptable views, basically using the rhetoric of Justin Trudeau against them, right?
Yeah.
Now we're in this situation where a party can do that. A party can literally smear a person and disqualify them from even being given the chance to participate in the democratic process of running to represent your community. They're being denied that right for trumped up charges of bigotry. This is a witch hunt. This is McCarthyism, right? Now, why is our system that way, and how can we make it better?
I would first begin by looking at other Westminster parliamentary systems. We don't see this level of top-down dictatorial micromanagement in the United Kingdom, where a very close family member of mine is a member of parliament. We don't see this level of micromanagement in Australia or New Zealand. There's an onus of trust and faith in the voters. That do they expect their elected official to be a saint?
Right.
Or there's an expectation to do what you say you'll do? And are there some transgressions that can be forgiven? And I believe firmly that that is best left up to the voters, not party insiders and political.
Yes, 100%. I mean, actually, I got to push back a little bit. The UK system is very party controlled in terms of who could be nominated, and even membership sales are not possible, right? Like you can't. I might be different in the part of the UK where your family member's from, but as far as I'm aware, at least in the federal level of the United Kingdom, right, the party tells the local constituency the two people they get to choose from.
In some regions, that may be the case for some parties. It does vary. I mean, look, you have the leader of the Labour Party who's a blatant anti-Semite.
Yeah,
You know, it's
there's true,
but his constituents don't seem to care about that. There's a level of oversight for sure, and not to say that political entities should not do a level of screening for candidates. I think there's a fiduciary responsibility as a political entity to ensure that the choices being presented are not trying to hide something or present a disingenuous face to the public.
Yeah, or there's corruption involved or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah,
precisely. And so I think there's a level of responsibility there. Have we gone as a society too far? And part of this is cancel culture. Part of this is just celebrity politics, where we're more interested in an individual than the policies and ideas that they espouse or their character. I think that's a part of it. You know, do I blame political systems in as much as I say society has to have some responsibility as well? I think it's a mixed bag there. I think that politics is a reflection of the society it represents.
Oh yeah, I've said that for this whole year, is that the system isn't broken. We are. Like, Canadians are the least democratically engaged, civically engaged in terms of our politics population in the democratic world, which is a little bit nuts.
Now there is hope to change that as far as the nominations and things of, you know, internal systems are concerned. There's methods and vehicles there to adopt. You know, I think the Reform Act was a huge step in the right direction.
Yes, and look at how well it was used on Aaron O'Toole, right? Like it worked perfectly, exactly for what it was meant to. Whereas Jason Kenney, it's like the caucus claims they don't want to get rid of him. Look at it this way: not a single cabinet minister that I'm aware of has publicly endorsed Jason Kenney for this leadership review. What does that tell you? I mean, there's a lot going on here, but what it tells me is that he's not a very popular man right now. But they still can't get rid of him because whatever, maybe they don't understand the system properly, maybe they're scared. I don't know, but I mean, he's obviously going to lose to Rachel Notley at this point. And yet they can't get rid of him because they don't have a secret ballot and they're too cowardly to do it themselves. Now, how do we fix cowardice? Right? Because does it really matter what our system is if our politicians are too cowardly to do anything about it? Like, this is a question that troubles me.
And this is where individuals who seek elected office, if they are unwilling to take principled stands and stand with the courage of conviction and be willing to lose everything for those convictions. And if they're not willing to do that for their own convictions, what the hell do you think they're going to do for yours?
Yeah, why would they? If they're, yeah, that's a great point, Cam. That should just be a qualifier. If you don't think that they're willing to lose everything for their convictions, they shouldn't be elected because they certainly won't do it for yours.
And I don't know that that's a method of you should be disqualified, but certainly I think that voters ought to bear that in mind when nominating their candidates and selecting their leaders. The onus of, you mentioned of the caucus. I think almost a demand of the voters in the next election ought to be a comprehensive reform act.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Don't leave it up to internal party constitutions. Pass legislation, make it a reform act that enforces private secret ballot votes within caucus, that enforces a level of fairness across the board, and how
maybe it forces parties to follow their own rules, so that if they say they're going to have an event on a day and an internal vote, that they have that event on that day and that internal vote.
And we've talked about this previously. The one of the major drawbacks with the Westminster system is its executive branch is no longer really an executive branch.
Yeah, it's a legislative branch too.
It's completely a legislative branch at this point. And so the premier or the prime minister has taken the role on of an executive branch, and there are no separations of power.
No, and it's just bad. It's bad.
And so in effect, you may as well have whoever it is as premier in the Westminster system show up, rubber stamp all legislation for the day, and everybody else can just go home.
Yeah. Just it's a dictatorship.
If there's no ability for dissent, if there's no welcoming of debate, intra-party debate, then you don't have a functioning democracy. You really don't.
No, that's a really good point. So there's two stories that I want us to tell before this is over. The first is the name of this episode. We're calling it Assassin's Creed, right? Because many people have referred to me as a political assassin, and I think that's kind of the ethos that you're known for. But what would you say your principles are? What are the principles you're willing to lose everything over? What's your creed?
Well, I object to being at the political assassin, as should you. I think that politicians should be chained as frequently as babies' diapers in some senses. And they start to get smelly after a little while, and they need to be taken out.
All we are is diaper changers. We're just changing the diaper. It's a stinky job, but someone has to do it.
It's been referred to as dome disease or whatever you want to call it. And instead of focusing on the negative, I would look at good politicians who have known when it was time to take stage left and exit with their head held high, with dignity, they've gone in, they set a target, and some of the most successful and happy public servants we can take a lesson from in looking at how they were able to get elected by doing and staying elected by doing what they said they would do, serving honorably, and leaving in a fashion and not overstaying their welcome.
Yeah. So, but you're avoiding the question. What is your creed? What are you willing to lose everything for?
For myself, being true to myself and the things that I hold dear and value. I value people who will say and do what they say they'll do. I draw the line at hypocrisy. I may not always agree with you, but if you tell me one thing and you go and do the opposite, you're damn sure I'm going to make you pay for it.
Yeah.
Do
you think that's our Scottish, Irish blood? What do you think it is that makes us just so hate being lied to?
It's more than just being lied to, David. It's actual hypocrisy. I think that might give me some indigestion from time to time. It actually pains me more than when someone is being hypocritical, because not only are they lying to me, but they're lying to themselves, and that actually hurts me more than just being lied to. As strange as that may be, because more times than not, people who do that are lying in a broader sense to everyone around them
about themselves. They're really lying about themselves. Yeah.
Right. And so when you have people like that in elected office or in public servant positions, the onus of duty to do something about it in the past has weighed very heavily on me.
Do you think that's how you were raised? Do you think that what instilled that weight of responsibility?
I think certainly aspects of how I was raised.
Because we were raised very similarly for people who don't know. Cam's dad's a minister. We're both homeschooled.
Being the eldest child, I think, has a big segment of that as well. I think duty and responsibility from an early age gave me in both a blessing and a curse, again, to take exception to those who didn't or acted as if their actions didn't affect anyone but themselves.
There are a lot of those people, really there are. And it's funny because I find those people are the most common to say that you're that kind of person or that I'm that kind of person, right? For a long time, I thought I was that kind of person because that's what people told me. And I've realized, no, that's just what people say to me to try to control me, because I know the principles upon which I am making. For example, the reason I am going after Jason Kenney is because he arrested pastors. And I said that I would go after Jason Kenney, and I am a man of my word, and that I would not rest until he wasn't premier anymore. As a man of my word, I must keep my word. But not only that, the reason I must keep my word is because he violated something that is sacred to me. I know you're in a similar boat.
Yeah.
And yet people will say of you or me, oh, we don't have any loyalty. We're not good people. We're just in it as mercenaries. I get accused by pro-life groups, as well as by radical leftists, right? And what I guess I'm asking is, I'll say for me, my creed is very simple. I have one rule: don't mess with my friends. I usually use a different word. Underneath that, of course, is an even deeper rule: never mess with my family, right? And when you arrest pastors, you're messing with both my friends and my family. And so then it's very simple. Now you've violated my one rule. Now I must act in a way that will show people that rule cannot be violated without consequences, right? So what is your rule?
A well-respected mentor of mine told me, and a couple of my buddies, you don't have to hate to kill. And so I temper my actions with that in mind, and my emotions with that in mind, that regardless of how I feel about a violation of my principles or a violation of trust, I will not allow the very strong emotion of hate to be a guiding factor in my actions. That does not mean I will not destroy those who violate those principles. And I have in the past, and I don't take pleasure in it. But if you're to look yourself in the mirror as a man, am I allowed to use the word man? I don't know. Anyway, if you're not able to look yourself in the mirror, then what are you? I think there's a sense of duty and a sense of honor attributed to rectifying wrongs, even those wrongs, and especially those wrongs that are not done to you personally.
Yes.
There are also those actions which can be not yet attributed. So there can be characteristics, and this goes back to a previous, my first experience in this, being on the receiving side of reactionary retribution. The perception and the understanding of the potential for future wrongs,
right,
and the urgency and the necessity for a preemptive
strike. Yes.
Yeah.
A threat. Removing a threat from the board. I mean, it's basic chess, right? You don't want to allow threats into your sphere of influence.
That's right. We're not going to wait for the wolf to be dragging away a young lamb.
No.
So I think that that's a component, I think, that I carry with me, that you've got to be true to your principles, act with honor, act with courage, stay committed to those who you believe you should be committed to, and reevaluate that. I think a lot of people have misplaced loyalties, and their perception of loyalty is often blind.
Yeah. Well, it's emotional.
It's emotional loyalty, it's blind loyalty, and there's a certain value, especially in Canadian politics, that the loyalty transfers to the individual, and the respect for the position is always there to the individual. And I would just offer your audience, respect the position of your leaders, but hold them accountable, and don't be afraid to hold them accountable. And holding someone accountable does not mean that you lack loyalty.
Yes. Well, in fact, holding someone accountable is the most loving thing you can do to them, even as a child. Giving them, saying, hey, your actions have consequences. And if a person doesn't learn that, as you were saying earlier, you're going to get taught that lesson over and over again until your actions have such a huge amount of consequences that you're faced with them.
Yeah, I would just add one further point on the whole Assassin's Creed topic. Of the dozens, and I think before I concluded in Canadian political activism, I think my tally was somewhere in the 50s or 60s as to directly managing or ensuring electoral outcomes were achieved for various individuals. I think it was somewhere close to 60 currently elected. And out of that number, I think there are two that would like to say that my actions have been disloyal when they were actually actions of accountability.
Yeah, and I mean, I say this to all those politicians I work for now, you know, leaders come and go. Organizers are forever. And I think it's an important lesson that a lot of politicians know, and they know that Cam's an organizer.
Well, I'd like to be known for other things, David, but
You know what? This is for such a time as this, the burden has been placed on our shoulders.
well, I do think there's a monumental task ahead of those in Alberta, a place I grew up and love and still call home. I think there's a monumental task ahead for those who are seeking good government.
Yeah, it's a journey, but you know, at least it keeps life interesting.
Well, and just remember, a government who governs less governs be. You know.
Yep, yep. Well, and you know, Mario Kart at the end of the day, right?
Well, David, I think there's a number of topics we could dive into.
Oh yes, absolutely. But I know you got to get going. I got to get going, and there's a lot left to do in the day.
I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, Cam, and thanks for being one of those friends that you're always talking about. I appreciate it.
Back at you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great our country is.